They are actually investigating the matter. Financial institutions are investigating the matter. And then the approach is that let's leave it to all those institutions until we are clarified what their outcome is going to be. Then we can actually cross that bridge when we reach it. That's all I can say about the president's situation.
All right, now accountability. Now Director Paul Hoffman says President Cyril Ramaphosa can only step aside if he's indicted by the NPA. This follows criminal charges laid by former State Security Agency head Arthur Fraser against Ramaphosa. Fraser claims the president failed to report a robbery at his Limpopo farm as required by law. Is Ramaphosa off the hook? Let's unpack this now with Hoffman, who joins us now virtually. Mr. Hoffman, I don't know if you were privy to the interview that I held with the Minister in the Presidency, Mondli Gungubele, who's saying that the government will not act against the president until an investigation is wrapped up. But we all know as South Africans how long investigations can take in this country.
Yes, that is certainly the case with the Criminal Justice Administration, which, in the words of Justice Richard Goldstone, was gutted during the Zuma era and has not been recapacitated ever since. So if this matter is left to the tender mercies of the Hawks and the National Prosecuting Authority, we're going to have a very long wait. But they are not the only authorities that are obliged to exercise oversight over the executive branch of government. It is one of the primary functions of Parliament under the Constitution to exercise oversight over Cabinet. And of course, the President is the head of Cabinet and the head of state as well. So there is no reason for Parliament to take a passive attitude at this stage. Parliament can require the President to come and answer some very simple questions. Was the game legally sold? Was the money legally stashed in his couch? Were people kidnapped or weren't they? Were people paid off to keep quiet or weren't they? Did the President have some form of authority to break away from the constitutional requirement that members of Cabinet are not allowed to earn an outside income? We all remember that when he became a politician returning from the wilderness of the world of business, he put his business assets into blind trusts. Well, nobody's even raised that yet as to whether that is what happened with his farming interests. On the contrary, he seems to think that everybody knows that he's a farmer and that big amounts of cash in foreign currency as well change hands when game is sold. Now, when game is sold in South Africa, you're meant to have a permit to do it. And certainly VAT and income tax would have to be paid on the type of transaction that seems to have preceded this whole debacle. So really, we're in a situation now with more questions than answers.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that's why South Africans are on edge about this particular case. I want to go back to the point you made that the president cannot step aside unless the NPA indicts him, right? But of course, South Africans are saying, well, he is the one that is enforcing one of the ANC's, resolutions of stepping aside if, criminal charges are brought against you, etc. But I guess you're saying this in the sense that, the separation of power part. There's the ANC and then there's government, and the president is not only president of the party, he's also president of the country. Is that where you're coming from?
Now, what I'm saying is that the ANC's internal rule can only be triggered when the National Prosecuting Authority formally charges Mr. Ramaphosa. The fact that a criminal complaint has been laid by one of his political enemies, Mr. Arthur Fraser, is neither here nor there from the point of view of the step-aside rule. And it has to be so. Otherwise, anybody can come with any trumped-up story, put it on affidavit, pop it down on the counter in a police station and say, we've laid charges against you, you must step aside, no matter how nonsensical the charges are. So the way that the ANC gets around that in its own rules is that you only sit up and pay attention from the point of view of deciding whether anybody should step aside or not when the authorities, the National Prosecuting Authority in this case, have decided that a charge must be brought against the president in this case.
Now, listening to, for instance, what the presidency said with regards to the video footage that was, basically released in terms of, giving us an idea as the public what happened at the president's home. They're saying that there's been a breach of security, but it goes further than that, right? If there is a breach of security by the EFF, that's only in addition to what already happened at the president's farm. The fact that somebody can get into the home of a head of state, even though he wasn't there, and take something and actually succeed in the crime. But also the PPU that he reported the crime to. Where was he and where was, his subordinates at the time to protect that property?
Yes, no, it seems that the story is that a group of people who'd been tipped off by a domestic servant of the president's, that there was a lot of dollars in cash stashed, somebody else has said, stitched into the couches in Pala Pala, cut the fence, crept into the house, got in through a ground floor window, and proceeded to make off with a great deal of cash. Now, that all seems to be common cause. The president has admitted that he was the victim of this burglary at Pala Pala. Some people call it a robbery, but there does not seem to have been any violence involved. And so to call it a robbery is an exaggeration. There was a burglary during which money was stolen. That is, in fact, what seems to be common cause between Mr. Fraser and the complainant and the president, the person who is facing and has to now explain his criminal complaint. But if the money was legally in the couch, which is a possibility, it doesn't seem to be probable, but if it was legally in the couch, and if he had permission to be in possession of a great deal of dollars, and if the sale that preceded the acquisition of the dollars was a duly permitted sale of game by the president to whichever buyers on which he has paid his VAT and paid his income tax, then he should say so, and he should say so now, because otherwise people are going to believe that he is no better than Jacob Zuma. And everybody knows now.
That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point, right? The fact that the presidency and the president himself are being so evasive, it just leaves even more time for South Africans to make up to make up their minds about it, right? And to conclude, and also the question about whether or not suddenly now it's a matter of let's wait for investigations to conclude because Arthur Fraser made it something that became known to the public. Was it always known, we wonder, by those in power that this happened at the president's home? Was it always being investigated, or is this something that's suddenly happening now because it's out in the public and there's questions about it?
Yes, it seems that the Hawks only came onto the matter last week. So look, it's obviously embarrassing to have a great deal of cash stashed in your couch, taken away from you. I think it's almost suicidal for a politician to be seen to be so silly as to think that keeping a large amount of money stitched into your couch or hidden away in your furniture is a good way of looking after, however temporarily, the proceeds of the sale of game at Pala Pala. But for so long as the president continues to duck and dive and evade and decline to make any documentation available, if he was genuinely a victim, a a victim of a crime that was committed against his property that was lawfully in his possession, then he ought to take the public and Parliament into his confidence and explain how it came about that the money stashed in his couch came to be there, whether that money was there temporarily and legally or not, and whether the sales that preceded the acquisition of the foreign currency were valid, lawful sales. Because if they weren't, then Mr. Fraser's allegation that prima facie there's money laundering going on here has legs. But if there are chits and receipts and tax payments and VAT returns that show that this was an entirely kosher deal, then for heaven's sake, don't sit around while other people flounder through the business of unpicking what happened in the president's farming business, and also work out whether the president is not in breach of the Constitution for acting as a farmer when he's meant to be acting as the head of state and the head of the national executive. It's Parliament's job to exercise oversight over him. And if he keeps ducking and diving the oversight, then Parliament's remedy is either to subpoena him to an inquiry in Parliament or to pass a resolution in terms of which Parliament is dissolved by a vote of 50% plus one. That's a simple majority vote. And if they do that, then the president is obliged under the Constitution to make sure that a national election is held within 90 days of the dissolution of Parliament. That might be, it's something that Professor William Gumede has been advocating in his column in the Weekend Press. And he started on this even before the Pala burglary became public knowledge. Yeah. He was talking about it in the context of the ANC being exposed as a criminal organization and being the subject of criticism from the Zondo.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Paul Hoffman from Accountability Now. It's going to be quite interesting, actually, what happens in the next few days in terms of whether or not we'll find out exactly what happened from the president's mouth himself. But in the meantime, as you heard Paul Hoffman say, the longer he keeps quiet, the longer, the more time he's giving South Africans to make their own conclusions.